In the late 1880s, while county clerks across the American South undertook routine audits of agricultural estates for taxation and probate purposes, a pattern emerged in several plantation account books that drew quiet attention from local officials. These were not personal diaries, nor were they memoirs written after the fact. They were ledgers, worn, grease-stained, bound in cracked leather, maintained continuously over decades. In one such plantation ledger, preserved among estate papers in a southern county courthouse, the handwriting changes abruptly in the early 1870s. The careful copperplate script that had once belonged to a white overseer disappears. In its place appears a steadier, smaller hand, repeating across pages that detail cotton yields, seed purchases, medical expenses, wage advances, debt calculations, and correspondence tallies. By the 1880s, this handwriting dominated the books entirely. County tax auditors noted that the individual maintaining these records was not listed as a salaried clerk in census schedules. She did not appear in payroll summaries. Yet her calculations governed every financial movement of the plantation. Crop liens, supply orders, labor contracts, and debt settlements were all reconciled in her hand. Archived census enumerations from the 1880s identify her not as a clerk, accountant, or manager, but as a laborer, marked with the racial designation assigned to formerly enslaved people. Plantation correspondence from the same period refers to her only indirectly. The girl who keeps the books. She understands the accounts better than the overseer. Contemporary newspapers did not report her role. Court records mention her only when disputes arose between landowners and creditors, disputes that relied entirely on figures she recorded. Historians examining these documents a century later would note the contradiction plainly. The plantation functioned under her financial control, yet legally and socially she remained bound to the lowest rung of the Southern labor order. What unsettled later researchers was not merely her skill, but the silence surrounding it. The records showed that for years, the plantation operated at a profit solely because of her accounting discipline. Yet there was no evidence of payment, recognition, or legal autonomy. The discovery was not dramatic. There was no confession, no trial revelation. It was simply there, embedded in the ink of routine paperwork, quietly contradicting the racial and economic hierarchy the plantation claimed to uphold. By the 1880s, the American South existed in a state of unresolved transition. Slavery had been formally abolished for more than a decade, yet systems of coercion remained embedded in daily life. Sharecropping, debt peonage, and convict leasing replaced the plantation slavery of the antebellum era, preserving economic control while altering its legal appearance. Archived labor contracts from the period show formerly enslaved individuals bound to plantations through perpetual debt. Illiteracy, deliberately enforced before emancipation, left many unable to contest written agreements. Those who could read and write were rare and, for that reason, indispensable. Census records from the 1880s frequently list African American women as laborers regardless of actual duties performed. Educational attainment, when noted, was often minimized or omitted. This administrative flattening concealed complex labor hierarchies operating beneath the surface. Plantation management relied heavily on record-keeping. Cotton prices fluctuated sharply during this decade. Rail transport fees, fertilizer costs, and medical expenses required precise accounting to avoid insolvency. Many white landowners, particularly absentee ones, depended on skilled clerks to prevent financial collapse. In some estates, these clerks were white men hired from nearby towns. In others, especially those struggling to maintain profitability, trusted laborers assumed these roles without formal acknowledgement. Contemporary agricultural journals from the 1880s emphasized the necessity of competent bookkeeping to survive the post-war economy. Yet they remained silent on who performed that labor when planters lacked capital to hire clerks. The woman identified in the plantation records emerged within this context. Her literacy was likely acquired clandestinely before emancipation or through informal schooling during Reconstruction. By the time federal oversight waned and racial restrictions hardened again, her skills were already indispensable. The social order of the 1880s South permitted no public recognition of such authority. To acknowledge that a black woman controlled the financial operations of a plantation would have undermined the racial logic sustaining the system itself. Thus, her authority existed only on paper, and even there, without attribution. The plantation owner, according to probate filings in the 1880s, resided primarily in a regional town, visiting the estate only seasonally. Daily operations were left to overseers who rotated frequently, a pattern confirmed by employment records and correspondence. The overseers relied entirely on existing ledgers to understand the plantation's finances. Letters preserved in estate files contain repeated acknowledgments that they did not know the figures and deferred to the one who kept the books. Creditors, too, interacted indirectly with her work. Court records from debt disputes cite ledger entries as evidence without naming their author. In several cases, judges accepted these figures as authoritative, even while the woman who recorded them remained legally invisible. Medical expense logs show consistent purchases of remedies and physician visits for laborers, suggesting a level of welfare oversight uncommon for the period. Agricultural output stabilized during her tenure, according to export records. Escalation came not through violence, but through exposure. When the landowner died in the late 1880s, estate settlement required a full accounting. Attorneys discovered that no one else understood the books. Only then did correspondents acknowledge her role explicitly, though still without granting status or wages. The records reveal unease, not admiration. Her competence threatened the assumptions on which the plantation hierarchy rested. The silence surrounding her role is consistent across record types. Census data misclassifies her labor. Newspapers omit her entirely. Court documents reference her work without naming her. Historians note that such omissions were not accidental. Acknowledging her authority would have contradicted the legal and racial frameworks reinstated after Reconstruction. Silence preserved order. The ledgers themselves remain the most direct testimony. Page after page shows consistent arithmetic, careful notation, and long-term planning. These are not the marks of incidental assistance, but of managerial control. Yet no document records her consent, compensation, or freedom of movement. In this sense, historians argue that her condition constituted a form of illegal enslavement, maintained through economic coercion rather than chains. Institutional systems benefited from her labor while denying her recognition. The plantation survived. The county collected taxes. Creditors recovered debts. She remained unnamed. After the estate's settlement, records suggest the plantation was sold. Her name disappears from subsequent documents. Whether she left voluntarily or was displaced is unknown. What remains is the paper trail. In the absence of testimony, the ledgers stand as evidence of a contradiction at the heart of the 1880s Southern economy: dependence on Black expertise alongside systemic denial of Black autonomy. Historians caution against romantic interpretation. Her skill did not grant protection, wealth, or security. It merely sustained a system that refused to acknowledge her humanity fully. The legacy of such cases lies not in triumph, but in exposure. They reveal how power functioned quietly, bureaucratically, and without spectacle. The plantation ran because she ran it. The records prove it. History, for a long time, chose not to look.